Today, I want to tell you about a country lane and a truck. And the moment I understood completely and viscerally that nobody was going to take care of me if I didn't take care of myself. Here's the thing. I was running late to a client appointment. Massively late. The kind of late where you're already mentally writing the apology before you even arrived. And I was driving through backcountry lanes, the kind with no signal, no room to pass, no logic to the bends, and I was stressed. That particular grinding, self inflicted stress of someone who's overcommitted to other people's needs and is not paying the price in real time. I couldn't call the client to tell them that I was going to be late. There was no signal. I couldn't even let them know I was on my way. I could only drive to try to get there fast. Maybe faster than I should have been. Because feeling late honestly felt like a catastrophe. Because being late meant that the client might be annoyed, might think less of me, might conclude that I wasn't the professional I aspired to be. And then a call came through, somehow, and possibly a call from another client. And while I had no signal to make a call, this one was coming in. I glanced at my phone in confusion, and in that moment, coming around a bend, there was a truck, a massive truck, taking up almost all of the narrow lane. And I'm not going to dramatize what happened next because I don't need to. I'll simply say that I'm here, um, obviously, to record this episode. And I'm grateful for that fact in a way that's difficult to put into words. But after that, I pulled over, my heart hammering, hands not quite steady. I was still late. I was even later now. And I sat in that car on the side of the country lane and I couldn't move for several minutes. And the reason I couldn't move wasn't just the shock and the near miss, it was something that had arrived in the quiet of that parked car. And that's so clear, so obvious, and so completely absent from the previous 30 minutes of rushing and stressing and prioritizing everything except my own safety. The thing is, I realized that if I had been hurt on that road, if that whole interaction with that passing truck had gone differently, my client being inconvenienced would have been the least of anyone's problems. The client would have survived my lateness with mild annoyance for a short time, but I would have not have been fine. And nobody else was going to make that decision to keep me safe. Nobody else was in that car. Nobody else was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, Vera, slow down. You matter more than being on time for this appointment. That decision belonged entirely to me. And I'd been making the wrong one. And here's why that moment landed as heavily as it did. When I was 16 years old, I was in a serious car accident. The car I was driving rolled, ended up upside down on the road. I was wearing my seatbelt, and that seatbelt is the reason I'm here to tell you any of this. I walked away shaken, frightened, changed, but I walked away. But sitting on that country lane in that parked car, decades later, I felt 16 again. And that same specific terror, that same understanding of how quickly and completely everything can change. And I want to pause here before I tell you what happened next, because I want to ask you something. Have you ever had one of those moments? Not necessarily in a car, but a moment where something stopped you, really stopped you, and made you think, if I don't take care of myself, nobody else is going to. A moment where the consequences of not prioritizing yourself and your health suddenly felt very, very real. A near miss, a health scare, a morning you looked in the mirror and you just didn't recognize yourself, a conversation maybe that made you realize just how much you'd been putting yourself last. Have you had yours? Because what I want to tell you today, what I've wanted to tell so many women for so long, is that you don't have to wait for a truck on a country lane or a near miss to give yourself permission to matter. Because the reality is, the consequences of not taking care of myself would always fall most heavily on me, not on my clients, not on the people whose expectations I was rushing to meet, on me. That was the day the first of today's three sentences that I'll share with you in this episode became genuinely bone deep real for me. Not a nice idea, not something I'd read somewhere, a truth I had earned the hard way. And that sentence is this: I am allowed to focus on myself. Today, we're talking about three sentences, three tools, three things I say to myself when the friction and the resistance and the weight of other people's expectations make it feel genuinely impossible to keep going. Three things I want to put in your toolkit for the moments when moving forward with your health goals feels harder than staying exactly where you are. They're simple, three sentences. They're not magic, but they are real. And they've helped me more than I can tell you. And I believe they can help you. Now, let's get into it. Before we start, I want to personally welcome you to my podcast. I'm Vera Brown, weight loss, health, and fitness coach for women 40 and above who want to lose weight and transform their health naturally and sustainably. After struggling with my weight and health for decades in the corporate world and as an entrepreneur, I lost more than 100 pounds in my mid 40s and kept it off. No pills, no injections, no procedures, no extremes, no tracking. In my podcast, I share what worked for me, including actionable strategies. I discuss fitness, nutrition, sleep, stress, and mindset to help you achieve your weight loss and health transformation goals. Join me. Now, let's get into it. And before we go any further, I want to say something important here because I know some of you have listened to a lot of podcasts about mindset, about believing in yourself, about your why. And I genuinely believe in all those things. But today's episode is different. It's not a mindset episode as such, it's a tactical episode, strategic episode. Today, I'll give you three sentences, three specific practical tools, things you can start using today, not when you feel ready, not when things get easier, not when you've had your breakthrough, today, in the middle of a difficult moment, in the middle of a difficult week, at the beginning of your journey, or deep in the messy middle, or at a plateau where you've been stuck for months, after a setback, after starting over, wherever you are, this is for you. All of it, and all of you. Because here's what I've noticed after coaching women through health transformations in midlife: the practical stuff, the food, the movement, the sleep, the stress, most of us know quite a lot. And more often than not, we know enough. The thing that often stops us isn't information, it's internal friction, the resistance within ourselves and the resistance from the people around us. And nobody gives us tool for that. And that is what today is all about. Now, a quick note before we begin. Today's episode touches on self-worth, identity, and the emotional landscape of prioritizing yourself. Sometimes after years or decades of not doing so. For most of us, that's territory that's simply overdue. But if any of what we discussed today connects to something that feels genuinely heavy for you, something beyond the frustration of not meeting health goals into something more distressing, please reach out to a qualified healthcare professional to support you. You deserve that. And everything in today's episode is underpinned by my standards over rules method, the foundation to all my coaching work. Not rules someone else imposed on your life. No, your own standards built from what you genuinely need and what you deserve. And today is about giving you three very simple, very powerful building blocks for exactly that. Let's go. Now, let me start with something I want to name clearly before we do anything else. If you've ever decided to prioritize your health, I mean, really decided, genuinely committed, and found that it was harder than you expected, not just the practical hard, the relational hard, the internal hard, the this is disrupting everything in my life hard. I want you to know you're not alone, and no, you are not doing it wrong. What you're experiencing is friction, completely normal. The specific, real, and almost completely undiscussed friction that happens when a woman who has been putting everyone else first for years decides to stop. And everything in her life and in her own head pushes back. So, let me tell you what that friction can look like because I think naming it specifically rather than just calling it hard and moving on is one of the most useful things I can do for you today. So, first, there is the friction from within yourself. And that often shows up as the voice that says, "Who do you think you are?" That ingrained belief that your time, your energy, your physical self is simply not as important as the demands being made on it. And the guilt that arrives when you say no to something in order to say yes to yourself. That specific discomfort of treating yourself as priority when the habit of not doing so has been established for so long, it's become invisible. And I know that voice. Most of the women I work with absolutely know that voice. I know it because I had a version of that voice telling me to drive faster on a country lane rather than disappoint a client. I know it because I've heard from more women than I can count in more variations than you'd believe. And then there's the friction, the very real friction from the people around you. And this is the one that almost nobody talks about because it's complicated and real. Because when you start genuinely changing, when you start genuinely prioritizing your health in ways that are visible and sustained, some of the people around you are going to feel it. Your partner may need to adjust their expectations of your time, your colleagues, your friends, your family. They might end up in conversations that are awkward and uncomfortable. Your children might notice your different behavior. And here's the one thing that took me the longest to understand. Sometimes the people around us aren't resisting our change because they don't want good things for us. No. They're sometimes resisting change because change in one person inevitably holds up a mirror to everyone around them. And not everyone is ready to look in that mirror. I remember a period early in my own health transformation when a friend I'd known for years started pulling away. Not dramatically, but just slightly less available, slightly cooler. And if I'm honest, I spent weeks wondering what I'd done wrong. And eventually she said something that cracked my heart a little, but also made everything make sense. She said, "Watching you do this makes me feel terrible about not doing it. And I can't keep being around that feeling right now." She wasn't a bad person. She was someone who wasn't ready yet. And the thing is, I wasn't preaching any of my health changes to her, not in the slightest. But yet, with all the changes that I was doing to my life and my health, she couldn't help but see them and compare them to what she was or wasn't doing. And I realized that the kindest thing I could do for both of us was to keep going anyway with my health choices with compassion for her, but also without letting her discomfort become my reason to stop. And I think there's also something specifically relevant for women who are committed to a long term transformation rather than a short term program or a quick diet. Because the reality is, when people around us, when they understand, truly understand, that we're not just on a 12-week challenge that'll be over by summer, when they start to understand that we're genuinely, permanently changing how we live forever, then the stakes of those conversations get higher for everyone. Permanent change is destabilizing in a way that temporary programs just aren't. And that is hard to navigate. Let's be honest. If you're finding it hard now, you are not alone. So, you know what the friction is, you know where it comes from. Now, I want to give you three sentences, three very specific, very personal, very useful sentences for the moments when that friction feels like it might win and it might derail your health transformation goals. Now, before I do, I want you to think of something right now. The source of the most friction in your life around your health right now, the most persistent resistance. What is it? Is it internal? Is it a specific person in your life? Is it a habit so deeply established that changing it feels almost physically impossible? I want you just to name it. Just name it. Because the three sentences today will land differently, more specifically, more usefully and powerfully when you have something concrete to hold them against. Got it? Good. Let's go. The first sentence I want to offer you is this: it's that clarity from that car on that country lane. I am allowed to focus on myself. Now, I can already hear the reactions because I've heard them in coaching calls and in my own head for years. You might be thinking, that sounds selfish. I know it does. But I want to spend a moment on that word because selfish, I believe, is a word that gets weaponized against women in a particular way when they attempt to prioritize their own needs. So I want to offer you today a different way of looking at it. Selfish means taking something at the expense of others. It means your gain causes their loss. But choosing to go for a walk, to prepare a nourishing meal, to get to bed at a decent hour, to get some proper rest, to say no to one commitment so you can say yes to your health, does any of that actually harm the people around you? Or I would offer, does it simply inconvenience their expectation that you'll always be available to accommodate everyone else's needs first? Because those two things are not the same thing. Inconveniencing or challenging an expectation is absolutely not the same as causing harm. And it's worth being very clear on that distinction because the guilt that lands on you when you prioritize yourself is real, but it isn't always telling you the truth about the impact of your choices. And look, you've probably heard the oxygen mask analogy. You know, when you're in an airplane, put your own oxygen mask on before helping others. It's true. And I know it can feel like the kind of thing that you stitch on a cushion and that you see plastered on social media. So let me give you something more personal instead. I told you about that scary moment with the country lane and the truck. And sitting in that parked car with my hands not quite steady, realizing I nearly traded my life for a punctual arrival. And the thing is, what I understood in that car, in a way I never quite understood before, is that the consequences of me not taking care of myself would fall most heavily on me. Not on my clients, not on the people whose expectations I was rushing to meet, on me. And nobody else was going to make that decision to keep me safe. Nobody else was in that car. Nobody else would say, Vera, stop, slow down. Nobody else but me. And I think that's true of health in the exactly same way. Because chances are nobody is going to prioritize your health for you. It just doesn't work that way. Nobody's going to decide that your energy, your vitality, your body, your future are worth protecting. That decision is yours and only yours. And the consequences of not making it will fall most heavily on you. Not in a guilt inducing kind of way, in a liberating way. Because here's the thing, if that decision is entirely yours, if the only person who can truly give you permission to focus on yourself is you, then you don't need to wait for anyone else to give it to you. That permission is available to you right now, today, in whatever season of life you're in, whatever history you're carrying. Let me tell you about a woman I worked with because she came to me after 23 years of putting everyone and everything first. She was the person her family called when anything went wrong, the first into work and the last to leave, the friend who showed up, the partner who managed. And she was, by any external measure, extraordinarily capable and generous. But she was also completely and utterly depleted. And in our first session, I asked her when she'd last done something purely for herself. Not necessarily anything related to health, just anything. Not as a reward for getting through a difficult week, not sandwiched between two obligations, not partnered with another obligation for someone else. No, just for herself, just because she wanted to. And the thing is, she couldn't remember. And I asked her, do you believe you're allowed to focus on yourself? And she said something I'll never forget. She said, I believe I'm supposed to say yes. It's obvious by the way you're asking me that question. But if I'm being completely honest, I'm not sure I actually believe it. And I want to pause here for a second. Does any part of her answer resonate with you? Because I think it just might. And for her, that honesty was the beginning of everything. It wasn't a program, it wasn't a plan. That honest admission that she'd been waiting for permission that was always hers to give. And when I followed up with her 6 months later, she told me something that I think about often. She said, I'm not doing this for anyone else anymore. I'm doing it because I finally believe I'm worth doing it for. And that's changed everything about how I show up for myself and honestly for everyone too. And that's the first sentence at work. Now, I want you to say it with me. Not think it, say it out loud right now, even if it feels slightly uncomfortable, especially if it feels slightly uncomfortable, because the discomfort is information. It's telling you exactly where the work is. Are you ready? Okay, let's say it together. I am allowed to focus on myself. Now say it again. And please, with more conviction this time, like you mean it because you do. I am allowed to focus on myself. That sentence, that permission, write it somewhere you'll see it today. Put it in your phone, put it on a sticky note because today and every day when the guilt arrives and the friction pushes back, that is the sentence you reach for first. Now, the second sentence I want to give you today for your toolkit is this: I am allowed to want more. And before I explain this one, I want to ask you something. Think about the last time someone in your life said, with love, genuine with love, something like, "Oh, you don't need to change." Or, "Oh, I love you just the way you are." Or, "Oh, you're being too hard on yourself." Or, "Why can't you just be happy with what you have?" Even if those comments from those people came from a good place. Did any part of you feel frustrated when you heard that? Did any part of you think, but I want more? And then immediately you felt guilty for even thinking it. Because if it did, this sentence that I'm giving you today is the one that addresses exactly that. This is the sentence that catches people in a different way from the first. If the first sentence is about permission to act, this one is about permission to want. And for so many women, the wanting itself has become something to feel ashamed of. And to illustrate this point even more powerfully, I want you to think about a student. Maybe yourself when you were younger in junior high, high school, college. Maybe one of your children, maybe somebody you know, niece, nephew. But think about a student. Imagine a bright, capable teenager or young adult who's been getting B's across most of her subjects. Not because she's not able, but because she's been distracted or maybe disengaged or simply going through the motions without any particular fire behind the work. She gets B's. That's pretty decent. She gets through. She shows up. And then one day, she discovers chemistry or maybe another subject, and something clicks. The kind of clicks that is almost physical when something that felt abstract suddenly becomes vivid and alive and genuinely fascinating. So, she falls in love with chemistry. She starts doing the extra reading. She starts doing her homework. She starts asking questions after class. She starts thinking about what she could do with this subject if she really pursued it. And then she goes to her parents and says, I've been a B student until now, but I want more. I want to really pursue this. I want to see how far I can take it. And I want you to pause. What would you say to her? What would you say to that B student who wants more? Would you say, I love you just the way you are. You don't need to be an A student. You're perfect as a B. Why are you being so hard on yourself? You don't need to be an A student. You're perfectly fine where you are as a B. No, be honest. Of course you wouldn't. You would say, that's wonderful. That's exciting that you found the thing that makes you want more. That's one of the best things that can happen to anyone. And I'm here to support you. So here is my question to you. Why? Why do so many of us say the opposite to ourselves when it comes to our health goals? Why, when we look at our energy and vitality and our body and our futures, and we think, actually, I want more than this. Why do we feel shame? Why does the wanting feel like ingratitude or vanity or some kind of betrayal of the people around us who've been fine with the B version of us all along? Because here's the truth: just because you were okay with something in the past doesn't mean you have to be okay with it for the rest of your life. Just because you've been a certain way in your relationship with food, your body, your health, yourself, doesn't mean you're not allowed to decide that you want something different now, something more, something better. And I think this is the one that sometimes creates the most friction with the people around us. When you start wanting more for yourself, and when you start changing in visible, sustained ways, some people in your life might feel, without quite knowing why, that it reflects on them, that your ambition for a better, happier, healthier version of yourself implies something about the life you've been sharing with them. And sometimes, and this is the harder conversation, the people who feel most unsettled by your change are the ones who've been meaning to make similar changes themselves. Your transformation can literally hold up a mirror, and absolutely not everyone's ready to look at it. But I would offer you this: that is not your responsibility to manage, but it is something to understand. Because understanding it means that you can have more compassion for the discomfort you're creating in others without allowing that discomfort to stop you from becoming the person you want to be. I'll give you another example of another woman I worked with who had been a certain size for most of her adult life, a plus size. And no shame, no judgment. I have been a plus size for many, many years. So I get it. I've been there. In many ways, this woman's story mirrors my own. But the thing is that her friends, her social circle, the language of her group, it was all built around a particular version of her, a plus size her. And when she started genuinely changing, she told me something that stayed with me. She said, "Do you know, the hardest part isn't the food and it isn't the exercise. It's that every time I make progress, I feel like I'm becoming someone my friends don't recognize. And there's a pressure, subtle, unspoken, but completely real, to not change too much, to stay recognizable, to stay their friend who's been their friend for years." Does any of that resonate with you? Because I think it just might. It certainly resonated with me when she said that. And I told her, look, you are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself that other people are comfortable with. You are allowed to want more, not instead of the people you love, alongside them, but the wanting itself, the ambition, the fire, the decision to pursue a better version of your health, that belongs to you. It doesn't require their approval. So here's your question: what is the thing you've been telling yourself that you're not allowed to want? And I'm not asking about the surface answer here. I want you to dig deep, the real one, the one underneath the answer of, I just want to be healthier or I just want more energy. What do you actually want for your health in your future? Say it in your head right now, clearly, specifically, because I want you to hear yourself want it, not just around the edges, but directly, because you are allowed, completely, fully, unapologetically allowed. And I want you to say it with me out loud with the same energy you'd use if you were saying it to the person you love most. I am allowed to want more. And again, and mean it. I am allowed to want more. And that is not selfishness. That is not ingratitude. That is you finally, honestly taking yourself as seriously as you take everyone else. Now, the third sentence I want to add to your toolkit today is coming up. And this is the one that I want you to sit with the longest. And it is this: I am allowed to become someone different. Not simply I'm allowed to change my habits, although you clearly are. Not I'm allowed to try a new approach. Absolutely. I am allowed to become someone different. Because the change we're really talking about here, when it comes to genuine, lasting health transformation in midlife and beyond, it isn't just behavioral, it's identity. An identity change is the most profound and the most destabilizing change there is. And let me tell you what I mean. When I was in my 30s and early 40s, before my own transformation, I had an identity around my relationship with food and my body and my health. Some of it was explicit. I knew I was someone who struggled with my weight, who tried various programs and diets and methods that hadn't sustained, who had a complicated relationship with certain foods, and who frankly used exercise to burn off calories rather than to just enjoy. But some of that story was invisible. The way I moved through a room, the way I positioned myself strategically in photographs, the things I quietly declined without ever explaining why, the energy I spent managing how I was perceived, all of that was me. And I'd stopped noticing it because it had been there for so long. And when I started genuinely changing, when I started becoming someone who moved through the world differently, who occupied space differently, who related to food differently, I had to let go of that identity. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, over 2.5 years, one tiny shift at a time. The person I had been became someone I was no longer quite being. And that's terrifying. Even when the change is something you desperately want, even when the direction that you're taking is entirely right, letting go of who you've been, even the parts of yourself you're glad to release, that requires a kind of courage that we rarely acknowledge in conversations about health and weight loss. And there's one more dimension of this I want to name particularly. It's the inner voice. Because most of us have a narrator throughout our lives, an internal voice that runs commentary on our choices, our body, our progress, our worth. And for many of us, particularly if we've been on this health journey for years, that narrator, that inner voice, isn't particularly kind. It's the voice that says, "Oh, you'll probably fail this time too." It's the voice that notices every deviation from the plan and files it as evidence. The voice that's developed over years and years, maybe decades, has a particular way of speaking to you about your health that feels so familiar, it barely registers as something you're choosing to hear. And here's the thing that I want you to know about that voice: it isn't the truth about you, it's just a habit. Yes, a deeply ingrained, deeply familiar habit, but also a deeply unhelpful habit. That, at the end of the day, is just a habit. And habits can be changed. Not easily, not overnight, but they can be changed. So, what I consider an acceptable way to speak to myself right now is categorically different from what I used to accept. It's that harshness, the contempt, that automatic assumption of failure. I simply don't allow that anymore. Not because I'm perfect, far from it, not because I never struggle, not at all, but because I gave myself permission to become someone different, someone who speaks to herself the way she would speak to a woman she genuinely loves. And here's what that permission unlocked. Once the inner voice started to change, then honestly, everything else becomes more possible. Not easier, exactly, but more possible. Because the internal environment I was doing the work in had changed. I was no longer trying to build something new on a foundation of contempt and shame for myself. I was building on something gentler, something stronger, something sturdier. And I worked with another woman at some point who had been her own harshest critic for as long as she could remember. She came to me after having tried more programs as she could count, her phrase, not mine, and having concluded quietly, privately, devastatingly, that the problem wasn't the approaches, it was her. And in one of our conversations together, I asked her something I ask a lot of women I work with. I said, would you speak to your daughter the way you speak to yourself about your body? And I could tell um, that I sort of hit a trigger there because she was quiet for a long time and she said, no, absolutely not, never. And then I said, well, then you've already decided that she deserves better than this voice. You just haven't decided yet that you deserve better than this voice. And that was her moment when things started to change. Not a program change, but a true identity shift. The beginning of allowing herself to become someone different, someone who deserves the same kindness she automatically extended to the people she loved. So I want to remind you today you are allowed to become someone different. Different from the person who's been putting everyone else first. Different from the person who's tried and stopped and blamed herself. Different from the person who spoke to herself in ways she'd never speak to anyone she loved. You are allowed to let that person go with gratitude for what she endured and what she taught you and with genuine excitement for who you're becoming. Now, I want you to do something with me. Think about one specific story you've been telling yourself for years about your relationship with your health or your body. Something like, I'm someone who can't stick to things. Or maybe I'm someone who has no willpower around food. Or maybe I've always been like this and I'll probably always be like this. Create your own version. You know yourself best. Okay, got it? Now hold that thought because I want you to add 4 words to the end of that story that changes everything. Just 4 words. And those 4 words are, but I am changing. I'm someone who can't stick to things, but I am changing. I've always struggled with this, but I am changing. I've put everyone else first for 20 years, but I am changing. 4 words. That is the door opening. That's I am allowed to become someone different in action. And now I want to go back to that third sentence and now say it with me all the way with everything you've got. I am allowed to become someone different. One more time, because this one takes a moment to land. I am allowed to become someone different. That sentence right there, that sentence that you just said out loud, that's the one that changes everything. Not the food plan, not the exercise regime, the identity shift underneath them, the permission to be someone new. So, 3 sentences. Let me bring them together before we close today's episode, and then I want to do one final thing with you. I am allowed to focus on myself. This is the permission sentence, the one you reach for when the guilt arrives, when the friction from within yourself tells you that everyone else's needs come first, when the country lane of your life, all the rushing, all the prioritizing other people's agendas over your own safety and well being, when all of that starts to feel like it might win, that is the sentence that reminds you the consequences of not taking care of myself fall most heavily on me. And nobody else is going to make that decision for me. So I will. I am allowed to focus on myself. Second sentence from today's episode, I am allowed to want more. This is the ambition sentence, the one you return to when the people around you feel challenged by your change. When the mere effect creates friction in some of your relationships, when some quiet internalized voice tells you that wanting more is selfish or ungrateful or somehow a betrayal of who you've been, this is the sentence that reminds you the student who finds chemistry is allowed to pursue an A. And if you're allowed to pursue the version of your health and your life that you genuinely want, not instead of the people you love, alongside them, I am allowed to want more. Last one, I am allowed to become someone different. This is the identity sentence, the deepest one, the one you return to when the old voice shows up, the one that's been narrating your relationship with your body and health for decades in ways you'd never accept from anyone else. This is the sentence that reminds you who you've been is not who you have to stay. The inner narrator can change. The stories you tell yourself about what's possible for you can change. And you are allowed fully, completely, without apology, to become someone different from the person who needed to start this journey. I am allowed to become someone different. Now, I want you to say all three with me in sequence, out loud, with conviction. Because saying them together, all three sentences, one after the other, does something to your nervous system that just simply understanding them separately doesn't quite do. Ready? I am allowed to focus on myself. I am allowed to want more. I am allowed to become someone different. And again, and mean every single word. I am allowed to focus on myself. I am allowed to want more. I am allowed to become someone different. That right there, that is your toolkit. Three sentences, three tools available to you right now, wherever you are on this journey, in the messy middle, at a plateau, after a setback, at the beginning of something new. These three sentences are for all of it. And a brief practical word before we close today's episode about how to actually use these three sentences, because these tools are only useful when they're in reach of the moment you need them. So write them down in your journal or carved by your mirror in the notes app on your phone, wherever you are most likely to see them when things feel sticky. Some of the women I work with have them on a sticky note by their desk. Some say them every single morning as part of a small ritual before the day begins. Some have them saved as recurring reminders on their phone that goes off at the time of day when friction tends to be the highest. Whatever works for your life is right. And personalize them if that makes them land more specifically. I'm allowed to focus on my health. I'm allowed to want a stronger body. I'm allowed to become the woman who moves through the world with energy and confidence. Your version, your language, your words, the more specific they are to your actual life and your actual goals, the more useful they become in the actual moments when you need them. And what about when someone else is in the room? What do you do when you can't say them out loud? You can say them in your head, clearly, deliberately, with the same conviction you'd use out loud. The brain doesn't differentiate. What matters is that you say them with intention rather than just letting them drift through as a thought. Even silently, these three sentences can interrupt the old patterns and create a moment of space between the friction and your response to it. And if one of them doesn't quite resonate yet, if one lands as hollow or doesn't connect with where you are right now, put it aside, come back to it later. That's okay. We're all in different places on this journey, and the sentence that's most powerful for you right now might not be the same one that somebody else needs most. That's completely okay. Start with the one that has the most charge for you. The one that feels slightly uncomfortable, that is the one doing the work. And I want to mention something that fits this episode more than almost any other, because what we've been talking about today, the permission, the identity shift, the inner voice, this isn't just intellectual. It lives in your body. It lives in the stories you repeat to yourself so automatically, you barely hear them anymore. And shifting those stories takes more than understanding them. It takes practice, repetition, the kind of work that happens not just in a podcast conversation, but in the quiet moments when nobody's watching. And I created my mindset transformation collection specifically for this. 13 guided meditations and visualizations designed for women on executive's journey, not generic relaxation recordings, tools built specifically for the emotional and psychological landscape of health transformation in midlife and beyond, including one specifically designed to help you connect to the woman you're becoming, not the outcome, the woman herself, how she feels, what she's capable of, who she's choosing to be. Link is in the show notes. If today's episode landed somewhere real for you, I want you to have that support. And if you'd love to work with someone who can help you identify the specific friction in your specific life and circumstance, the patterns that are quietly working against your best efforts, in ways that you simply can't see from the inside, my one to one VIP coaching is exactly that. Not a generic plan, a real personal conversation that produces a real personal roadmap built entirely around your body, your life, your history, and where you want to go. Details are in the show notes of how to book. And let me leave you with this as we close out today's episode. You are an intelligent, capable, courageous woman. You are juggling more than most people will ever fully understand. You have been keeping things going for your career, your family, your relationships, the people who rely on you, probably for longer than you can remember. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you decided that your health matters. You hit play on today's episode. You decided that you deserve to feel well and strong and vital in your body. You decided that the decades ahead for you are worth investing in. And I want you to know I see you. I was you. And that decision was brave. And don't let anyone, including the voice in your head, tell you otherwise. Yes, the friction is real. Yes, the resistance is real. Yes, the discomfort of prioritizing yourself when you've spent years not doing so. That's also real too. And it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're doing something that matters, something hard, something genuinely worth doing. You have 3 sentences now, 3 tools in your toolkit, 3 reminders for the moments when the resistance feels like it might win. Write them down, return to them, say them out loud in the moments when it would be easier to stay quiet. Let them be the voice that answers back when the old stories that you've been telling yourself try to reassert themselves. I am allowed to focus on myself. I am allowed to want more. I am allowed to become someone different. You have absolutely got this. And I'm not saying that from a script. I genuinely believe it, and I'm cheering you on with everything I have. I will see you in the very next episode. Take care of yourself, all of yourself. And one final thing, if cravings are part of what's been getting your way on this journey, and I hear from women every single week that they're one of the most persistent and most frustrating obstacles, I want you to know I've been building something specifically for those moments. The waitlist is open right now to be the first to know when it launches. Go sign up. And would you do me a favor, please? If today's episode helped you, if it resonated with you, would you share it with one woman in your life who is struggling to remember that she is worth the investment in her health? If you're enjoying the show, a review on Apple Podcasts takes less than 2 minutes and really helps other women discover the show. Every single review matters. And thank you so much for taking the time to join me for today's episode. If you want more real, honest guidance on losing weight and transforming your health sustainably in midlife and beyond, you're in the right place. Subscribe here and get my strategies, mindset shifts, and the tools that actually work for women 40 and above. No BS, not quick fixes, just real transformation. Don't forget you deserve to feel good in your body and life. I believe in you and I'm cheering you on every single step of the way. For the obligatory legal disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, nutritionist, therapist, medical professional, or similar. All information shared on this podcast is purely for informational purposes and does not constitute medical advice. It is entirely your personal choice and responsibility as to what information you use. Please consult your own medical professional for any medical advice.